They told her to pull him back, to quiet the dog before panic spread. But Max refused to be silenced, and what he revealed left every parent frozen in fear. The late afternoon sun spilled soft light across Oakridge Park, painting the swings and seesaws in warm gold, as children laughed and chased each other through the playground. Parents sat on benches, sipping coffee and chatting while keeping one eye on their kids. It was the kind of quiet, easy day that made people forget bad things ever happened in their town. That illusion cracked the moment Max broke away from his handler. 1 second the German Shepherd was pacing calmly at Officer Claire Weston's side, his leash loose in her hand. The next, he lunged forward with a burst of strength that nearly yanked her off balance. He tore across the grass, ears flat, nose cutting the air like he had locked onto something no one else could sense. Claire shouted his name, her voice sharp with command, but he didn't even glance back. Children on the swings slowed, their laughter fading into confusion, as they watched the dog charge straight into their space. A small boy dropped his ball. Another clung to his mother's leg. Eyes wide, parents rose quickly, calling out in alarm, gathering their children close. For a heartbeat, it looked like chaos. A trained canine running wild through the middle of families who didn't understand what he was doing. 2 other officers sprinted forward, ready to intercept, but Max was faster. He reached the old wooden slide at the far end of the playground and stopped dead. His paws dug into the dirt, his tail stiff, his body rigid, as if braced for something terrible. Then he began to bark. The sound was sharp, deep, and relentless. Not the playful yaps children might expect from a dog, but a warning that cut through every conversation, every whisper of wind. People froze where they stood, chilled by the urgency in his voice. He barked again and again, the kind of bark meant to summon help, to say danger was near, to say something was wrong that no one else could see. Claire pushed through the crowd, breathless, her heart hammering. She grabbed for his collar, tugging him back, but he fought against her pull, his eyes fixed on the dark underside of the slide. The wood was worn, the paint chipped, a place where children had played for decades. Yet the way Max stared at it made it seem different now, sinister, heavy with secrets. Parents whispered to one another, voices low and fearful. One little girl clutched her doll tighter and asked softly, "What's he barking at?" Her mother didn't answer. Claire crouched beside her partner, torn between duty and instinct, feeling the weight of every parent's stare. Max growled low, pawing at the dirt, his claws raking the ground as if trying to dig something out. His whole body shook with tension, but his eyes burned with certainty. He wasn't being reckless, he wasn't misbehaving. He was pointing, demanding, begging them to look closer. The playground, once filled with laughter, had fallen into a silence so complete that every bark felt like a hammer against the heart. And though no one could see what he saw, everyone understood one thing. Max had found something, and whatever it was, it would change everything. Claire tightened her grip on Max's collar, pulling him back with all the strength she had, her face flushing hot as dozens of eyes locked onto her. Parents stood frozen with their children clutched to their chests, staring at the dog who refused to stop barking. Some looked frightened, others annoyed, and Claire could already feel the judgment rising around her, like a tide. She forced a strained smile and called out that everything was fine, her voice tight and unconvincing, while her heart thudded in her chest. The chief stood at the edge of the playground, arms crossed, his jaw set hard, as he gave her a look that was more warning than question. Max's barking was cutting through the calm like a knife, and to him, it looked like loss of control. "Max! Enough!" Claire hissed, tugging his collar, trying to command the authority she'd been trained to have. But Max was immovable. His paws dug deeper into the dirt, his muscles tense, his ears locked forward, as though he could see what no one else could. He growled low, deep in his chest, and his nails raked the ground beneath the wooden slide. He wasn't distracted. He wasn't confused. He was certain. Claire could feel it in the way his body pushed against her hand, the way his eyes refused to break away. Still, she forced another laugh, brittle and hollow, assuring the worried mothers that he was just overexcited, just reacting to something ordinary. But Max didn't waver. He pawed harder, dirt scattering beneath him. His nose pressed so close to the ground it was like he was trying to crawl inside it. The sound of his growl made the children cling tighter to their parents. And then came the softest whisper from a boy no older than 8. A voice so small but sharp enough to pierce through the unease. "He smells something," the boy said to his mother, his eyes wide, his voice carrying just enough to reach Claire's ears. The mother hushed him, but the words hung heavy, spreading through the crowd like smoke. People glanced at one another nervously, wondering what the boy meant, wondering if the dog's strange behavior was more than misbehavior. Claire felt the heat rise in her cheeks again, caught between her training that told her to maintain control and her gut that told her to trust Max. She wanted to say the boy was wrong, that Max was just tired or overexcited, but even as she opened her mouth, she knew she couldn't make herself believe it. Max gave a sudden fierce bark, his paw striking against something solid beneath the dirt. Claire's chest tightened, her grip slackened, and for a moment she stopped pulling. His head snapped toward her, his amber eyes locking with hers, steady and insistent. He wasn't asking, he was telling. The playground, once filled with the light chatter of families, had sunk into a silence that felt too heavy to be normal. Even the wind seemed to pause as everyone watched. Claire swallowed hard, her doubts twisting inside her, because deep down she knew the boy was right. Max had found something, and pretending otherwise was no longer possible. The crowd pressed in close but kept their distance, parents holding their children back as detectives arrived with shovels and gloves. No one truly believed the dog had found anything real. Most of them expected the search to turn up a buried toy or a forgotten lunchbox, left behind by a child who had long since grown. The chief muttered under his breath that this was a waste of time, but even he couldn't ignore the way Max refused to move, his nose pressed low to the ground, his body rigid with focus. Claire stood beside him, her hand resting on his collar, feeling his steady weight anchoring her even as her heart raced. She wanted him to be wrong, wanted this to be some odd reaction that could be laughed off later, but the truth was clawing at her chest already. The first few scoops of dirt revealed nothing but roots and rocks. A mother whispered that this was silly, that they were frightening the children for no reason. Another nodded quickly, eager to believe the same. Claire watched the officers dig and forced herself not to fidget. She kept glancing down at Max, who sat calmly now, no longer barking but staring at the hole with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He wasn't restless anymore. He was waiting. Then the shovel struck something soft but resistant. The metallic scrape shifted to a dull thud. Everyone tensed. The detective crouched low, brushing dirt away with his gloved hand, his expression changing from impatience to unease. A corner of faded fabric appeared, tangled with mud. He tugged gently, and slowly a backpack emerged from beneath the soil, its straps frayed, its surface rotted and darkened by damp earth. The smell was sharp, of mold, and something older, something that made the air heavy. The detective unzipped it, and for a long moment, no one breathed. Inside were small clothes, folded in a careless heap, stained and weather-worn, and tucked between them a stuffed bear, its fur matted, one eye missing, the other hanging by a thread. The sight of it pulled a collective gasp from the crowd. Parents covered their mouths, children were pulled tighter against chests, and silence fell as though the entire playground had been struck mute. Claire's stomach dropped, her knees threatening to give way. She had seen photographs on the wall at the station, flyers posted on utility poles, desperate faces on the news. She recognized the bear. She recognized the clothes. They belonged to Lily Grant, the little girl who had vanished half a year ago on her way home from school. The memory of her parents' tears came flooding back. their pleas for answers that had gone unanswered. Claire pressed her hand harder against Max's collar, but he was steady, unflinching, his eyes never leaving the backpack. He sat tall now, silent but certain, and in that moment Claire felt the weight of his gaze on her. It was as if he was saying what words never could. He had told them. He had tried to show them. And now the truth lay uncovered in the dirt. The playground was wrapped in silence as the evidence team arrived, their gloves snapping into place, their faces grim beneath the afternoon sun. The backpack and its contents were carefully lifted from the dirt and placed into sealed bags. Each movement was deliberate, each detail recorded, because everyone there knew this was no ordinary discovery. Claire stood back with Max at her side, her chest tight as she watched the bear disappear into a clear plastic pouch. She had seen it before, pinned to posters, clutched in photographs by desperate parents begging for help. It belonged to Lily Grant, a girl with big brown eyes and a smile that had once lit up this very playground before she vanished without a trace 6 months ago. The confirmation came quickly. The clothes matched what Lily had been wearing the day she disappeared. The bear was her constant companion, and the initials stitched inside the backpack were hers. The detectives didn't need to say the words aloud for everyone to understand. The crowd that had gathered gasped, a sound that spread like a wave through parents and children alike. Mothers pulled their little ones closer, fathers held on tighter, and the chatter of a once relaxed afternoon turned into a rising hum of unease. The case had gone cold, files gathering dust in drawers, hope dimming with each passing week. Yet here in the center of their safe community, the truth had clawed its way back into daylight. Claire's eyes swept across the playground, and it felt different now. The wooden slide loomed darker. The swings no longer looked innocent. The sand underfoot seemed heavy with secrets. She saw the parents' faces change, saw fear replace the easy smiles, saw the way they scanned the crowd, now as though danger could be standing right beside them. A father bent low to his daughter, whispering for her not to stray, while another mother quickly gathered her children and hurried them away. The park that had once been a haven now felt poisoned, tainted by the knowledge that Lily's abduction had started here, beneath their feet, in plain sight. Max stayed seated, calm but alert, his eyes following the investigators as they sealed each piece of evidence. To Claire, he looked less like a dog and more like a sentinel, a guardian who had refused to let the truth stay buried. She crouched beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder, her voice low so only he could hear. "You were right," she whispered, her throat thick with emotion. He blinked at her, steady, as if he had known all along that she would finally see. The chief barked orders to secure the area. Officers began moving the crowd back, but the damage was already done. Parents would never look at the playground the same again. It no longer held the sound of laughter in their minds, only the echo of what had been found, the reminder of a girl who had played there and never gone home. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the park in long shadows, Claire knew this was just the beginning. Whatever had happened to Lily Grant, it had started here. And Max had been the only one who refused to let them forget. The evidence from the backpack had barely been sealed when Max lifted his head again, his nose twitching as though the air carried a secret no one else could sense. His ears stood high, his body tense, and Claire felt the leash tighten in her hand before she even realized he was moving. He pulled hard, dragging her across the sand, past the swings that swayed gently in the fading light. She called his name, trying to steady him, but he ignored her voice completely. Whatever he had locked onto was stronger than any command, and Claire knew better than to fight it this time. Agents trailing the scene exchanged doubtful glances, muttering that the dog had already done his part. Some followed reluctantly, their boots crunching against gravel, while others stayed back, convinced it was nothing more than excitement. But Max pressed forward with single-minded determination, weaving through the playground and toward the tree line at the far edge of the park. His pace quickened, his body low to the ground, every breath sharp as he sniffed the path invisible to human eyes. Claire stumbled to keep up, half running as he led her away from the noise of the crowd into the hush of the woods. The park's laughter and chatter faded behind them, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the steady tug of the leash. Max paused briefly, circling, then surged ahead again, dragging Claire through brush and bramble until they reached a hollowed log lying crooked against the forest floor. The wood was damp and moss-covered, nothing unusual to the naked eye, but Max froze before it like a soldier at attention. His hackles rose, his bark exploded into the quiet, sharp and furious, the sound of warning and discovery combined. The agents who had followed stepped closer, one kneeling down with a flashlight. He peered inside, and his face changed instantly from skepticism to grim disbelief. He reached in carefully and pulled out a strip of duct tape rolled tight into a ball, the edges ragged from use. Another hand pulled free a length of rope, knotted and stained. Then came candy wrappers, crumpled and discarded, but not old enough to be forgotten. They were the kind of sweets handed to children, the kind of lure that belonged to predators. The air thickened around them. No one spoke for a long moment, as the reality of what Max had found sank in. Claire's stomach twisted, a cold weight settling deep inside her. She glanced down at him, at the dog who now sat back on his haunches, chest rising and falling, his eyes locked on the log as though daring anyone to deny the truth. He had followed the scent of something vile, something hidden in plain sight, and brought it out into daylight. One of the agents finally muttered, his voice low and uneasy. "He's not just chasing shadows. He's showing us where they've been." Claire rested her hand on Max's back, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. That night, the playground stood under a different kind of light. The cheerful voices of children were gone, replaced by the faint hum of generators powering the temporary lamps the police had set up. Surveillance cameras were mounted high on poles and corners, their lenses pointed at the swings, the slide, and the tree line beyond. Parents had begged for action, and the chief wanted proof that Max's discovery was more than coincidence. Officers stood watch in the shadows, their radios crackling quietly, the air heavy with the kind of silence that only comes when people are waiting for something to happen. Claire sat with Max beside her, his head resting on her knee, but his ears twitched at every sound, his body alert, even in stillness. Hours crawled by, the park cloaked in darkness. The swings swayed in the night breeze, their chains groaning softly, and the old slide gleamed pale under the artificial light. Just when the officers began to believe nothing would come of the surveillance, the monitor in the command van flickered with movement. A figure appeared at the edge of the screen, stepping cautiously out of the trees. He moved slowly, his body hunched, his face hidden beneath a hood. But what made the breath catch in every throat was the limp, the dragging step followed by the soft tap of a cane. The man circled the playground like a predator circling prey, his head turning toward the empty swings, his shadow stretching long and crooked across the sand. He lingered by the slide, standing still for too long, his hand brushing the wood as if he were remembering something. The officers leaned closer to the screens, their expressions hardening as they studied his movements. He never looked at the cameras, never looked toward the street, only at the places where children had played. When the feed was slowed and sharpened, the outline of his cane became clear, the way it curved at the top, worn smooth from years of use. To the locals, it was unmistakable. It belonged to old Mr. Harlan, the retiree who fixed bikes for kids and handed out ice pops in the summer, the man who always waved from his porch and offered to help neighbors carry groceries. The room inside the van filled with a stunned silence, the kind that feels like betrayal. Claire felt her chest tighten, disbelief warring with anger. She had spoken with Harlan countless times, accepted his small talk, even trusted him with her own niece when he offered to keep an eye on the children at the park. She looked down at Max, who was now sitting tall, ears pointed, a low growl rumbling in his throat, as if he recognized the truth before anyone else. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, some shaking their heads, others muttering in disbelief. But the image on the screen did not lie. The man they had trusted, the neighbor everyone thought harmless, was haunting the playground like a shadow that refused to let go. The town would never look at him the same way again, and Claire knew deep in her heart that Max had been right all along. Morning came heavy over Oakridge, but instead of the usual chatter of children on their way to school or neighbors waving across fences, the town was buzzing with unease. The footage from the playground had spread quickly, whispered from one doorstep to another, until everyone knew the man on the tape, circling the swings in the dark, was not a stranger. It was Harlan Price, the man who had lived on Maple Street for nearly 30 years, the man whose cane everyone recognized, the man who had once been trusted enough to watch over the very children he now stalked. Neighbors gathered in clusters on sidewalks and porches, their voices tight with disbelief and anger. Some shook their heads, refusing to accept what they had seen. "It can't be him," one woman muttered, hugging her child close. "He fixed her bicycle just last summer. He even bought her a new helmet." Another man snapped back, "You saw the footage. That was his limp, his cane. No one else walks like that." The words stung the air, sharp and bitter, because everyone knew deep down that the truth was undeniable, even if it hurt to admit. Parents were furious. They had trusted Harlan, allowed him into their homes, invited him to birthday parties. He had handed out popsicles in the heat of July, smiled kindly as he taught kids how to fish at the lake, and shared quiet stories of his younger days. To think that the same man could have been circling the playground after dark, tied to the disappearance of Lily Grant, was more than most could bear. Mothers demanded answers from the police. Fathers shouted about how long he had been hiding in plain sight. The trust that had once stitched the community together now lay torn open. Claire sat at her kitchen table, her coffee untouched, her hands clenched tightly around the mug. She replayed every moment she had ever spoken with Harlan. Just last week she had shared a cup of coffee with him on his porch, listening to him grumble about the weather while he slipped her dog treats for Max. She felt sick at the memory, betrayed in a way that made her chest ache. How had she not seen it? How had she stood there smiling while a predator sat across from her? She looked down at Max, who lay at her feet, his eyes sharp, his ears twitching. When she whispered Harlan's name, his lips curled and a growl rumbled low in his throat. That sound sent a shiver through her. Max had never liked him, not once, not even in passing. While others saw a kindly retiree, Max had bristled, his hackles raised, his body tense. Claire remembered brushing it off, thinking he was just being protective, but now she realized he had been warning her all along. The town was split between disbelief and fury, but Claire knew the truth was settled. The children were no longer safe until Harlan was caught. The trust they had lost would never return in the same way, and every parent in Oakridge now saw the playground not as a place of laughter, but as a place where shadows still lingered. The raid on Harlan's house began quietly, as though the officers feared that speaking too loud might wake something dark inside those walls. His property looked ordinary, the kind of place that belonged in every neighborhood. A white porch swing creaking in the breeze, flower beds along the walkway, a flag hung carefully by the front steps. Neighbors whispered from their porches, clinging to each other, unable to reconcile the familiar sight with the rumors that had spread like wildfire. Claire stood in the yard with Max at her side, her heart pounding as officers forced the door open. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood, nothing unusual, nothing alarming. For a moment, doubt slipped into the minds of those watching. Maybe Max had been wrong, maybe they had been too quick to believe. But Max did not hesitate. He pulled Claire forward into the entryway, his nose sweeping left and right, his body taut with purpose. He ignored the furniture, the framed photographs of Harlan smiling beside children from years past. the polished shelves filled with books no one believed he had actually read. Max led them past the kitchen, past the living room where a television still flickered with static, until he reached a narrow hallway at the back of the house. His nails clicked against the wood floor as he stopped in front of a door half hidden behind a rack of coats. He sniffed, pawed once, then twice, and when no one moved, he let out a sharp bark that made everyone jump. An officer tugged at the doorknob, but it didn't budge. The lock was heavy, reinforced. Max growled low, scratching harder now. His body pressed against the frame as if he could force it open himself. The chief ordered the lock broken, and within moments a crowbar split the wood. The door swung open with a groan, and a wave of air rolled out, so sharp and wrong it made the first officer gag and step back. The smell of bleach burned their throats, but beneath it lingered something fouler, something that carried despair like a weight. Max slipped inside first, ears back, his growl steady as Claire followed. The room was dim, one light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The concrete walls were bare except for a row of chains bolted to the far side, their metal links clinking faintly in the draft. A cot sat in the corner, thin blankets thrown across it. And on the opposite wall, taped unevenly like a gallery, were children's drawings, crayon lines of houses and flowers, stick figures holding balloons, childish sons with wide smiles. Claire's throat tightened as she stepped closer. At the bottom of one, scrawled in uneven letters, was a single name, Lily. Her knees nearly buckled. She felt the world tilt, the realization cutting deeper than anything she had imagined. The lost girl had been here. Her small hands had touched these walls. Her crayons had scratched across this paper. The officers fell into silence, their earlier doubts shattered as the weight of truth filled the room. Max sat at the center, chest rising and falling, his amber eyes fixed on the drawings as though standing guard for the children who had been forced into silence. Claire laid a hand on his back, her voice breaking in a whisper meant only for him. You found her. The night air was thick with the smell of damp earth and pine as officers swarmed Harlan's property, their flashlights cutting sharp beams across the yard. Shouts echoed as they called his name, demanding he surrender. But by the time they reached the back door, it was already swinging on its hinges. Harlan had fled. His cane lay discarded by the porch steps, but his uneven footprints led straight into the woods beyond the fence. The chief barked orders for containment, but everyone knew chasing him in the dark was dangerous. He knew these woods, every trail and shortcut, every place where shadows swallowed the light. The town seemed to freeze in fear, parents locking their doors, blinds drawn tight, as news spread that the man they once trusted was now a predator on the run. Claire didn't hesitate. She clipped Max's lead and whispered for him to find. He surged forward instantly, nose low, his muscles taut with energy, his body slicing through tall grass like an arrow. Claire followed close, her breath catching with every step, her flashlight bouncing off tree trunks as they pushed deeper into the underbrush. Officers trailed behind, muttering their doubts, but she ignored them. Max was no longer responding to her usual commands. He wasn't waiting for permission or direction. He was locked onto something stronger than words, moving with the kind of certainty that only instinct could fuel. The forest was alive with sound, branches snapping under boots, the distant cry of nightbirds, the hiss of leaves shifting in the wind. Yet all Claire could hear was Max's steady breathing, and the low growl vibrating from his chest as he pressed onward. He paused once to sniff the air, then veered sharply off the trail, pulling her into a thicket so dense she had to shield her face from the whipping branches. Her uniform snagged, her knees scraped against hidden roots, but she never let go of the leash. Max pulled her deeper into the darkness, far from the glow of the houses, far from the safety of the streetlights. Suddenly, he stopped. His body went rigid, ears pricked high, tail stiff. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just stood frozen, his nose tilted forward, eyes locked on something Claire could not yet see. She lifted her light, but the woods stretched ahead in nothing but shadows. Her heart pounded hard enough to hurt, and she whispered his name, barely more than a breath. He ignored her, straining against the leash but holding his ground, waiting. Then Claire heard it. Faint at first, so soft she thought it was the wind, but then clearer, trembling, desperate, a whimper, the sound of a child. Her throat closed, her chest tight, as the reality sank in. Somewhere just ahead, hidden in the darkness, a small voice was crying, too weak to call for help, too afraid to scream. Max gave a sharp glance back at her, then back toward the sound, his message clear. He had found what no one else could, and he wasn't going to stop until they reached the child. The forest pressed in from every side, thick with shadows, every sound carrying too far in the silence of midnight. Claire gripped the leash tightly, her chest burning as she tried to match Max's pace. He no longer moved cautiously. He lunged forward with purpose, his growl low and steady, pulling her deeper into the underbrush until the trees gave way to a clearing. There, half hidden by brush and rotting wood, stood a shack that looked older than the town itself, its boards warped, its windows nailed shut, its roof sagging like a hunched back. The faint whimper came again, drifting through the cracks, fragile, but undeniable. Claire froze, her breath caught, but Max didn't wait. With a snarl, he tore free from her grip and charged straight at the door. His body slammed against it once, twice, until the wood splintered with a crack and the lock gave way. Claire raised her weapon, heart pounding, as Max vanished into the dark interior. The noise inside was immediate, shouts, a scuffle, the crash of something heavy falling. Claire stormed in, flashlight slicing across the room, just in time to see Max launch himself at Harlan. The man's face twisted with rage, his hand reaching for a gun at his belt, but Max struck before he could lift it. His jaws clamped onto Harlan's arm, forcing the weapon to the ground with a clatter. The cane toppled beside it, useless now against the weight of fury pinning him down. Harlan shouted, cursing, thrashing, but Max didn't let go. His teeth held firm, his body braced like steel, dragging the predator down to the filthy floor. Claire swept the room with her light and froze at what she saw in the corner. Two children huddled together under a pile of thin blankets, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. One of them, a little girl with tangled hair, clutched a stuffed bear so familiar it made Claire's stomach twist, the same bear they had found buried beneath the playground. But this one was newer, carried, loved, and held as though it were the only piece of safety left in the world. The officers who had followed stormed in behind her, pulling Harlan's arms back, cuffing him, even as Max kept him pinned. The predator groaned, spitting words that no one cared to hear. All eyes were on the children. They trembled but were alive, their breaths shallow but real, and that alone made the night feel like a miracle. Claire holstered her weapon and dropped to her knees, speaking gently, telling them they were safe now, that no one would hurt them again. Behind her, Max finally released his hold and stood tall, blood on his muzzle, his chest rising and falling as though he carried the weight of the entire town's relief. Claire turned to him, and in that moment the truth struck her with clarity. He hadn't just smelled what was buried, hadn't just uncovered the past. He had followed the trail of the present, the living, the lost who still had a chance. He had led them straight into the heart of danger to bring back what everyone else had given up on. Claire reached out, her hand resting on his scarred neck, her voice breaking into a whisper meant only for him. You didn't just find the past, Max. You saved the present. The courthouse smelled of old wood and polish, the air heavy with the weight of too many secrets finally being dragged into the light. Months had passed since that night in the shack, but the memory of it still burned in the minds of everyone in Oakridge. Now the man who had once been their trusted neighbor sat shackled at the defense table, his cane gone, his shoulders hunched, his eyes downcast. Harlan Price no longer looked like the gentle retiree who fixed bikes or handed out popsicles. He looked like what he was, an unmasked predator who had hidden behind a smile for far too long. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with parents, neighbors, reporters, and survivors who had come for justice. The air was tense, whispers darting back and forth until the gavel struck and silence fell. The prosecution laid out the evidence with precision, each piece like a nail hammered into the coffin of Harlan's lies. The backpack buried beneath the slide, the duct tape and rope hidden in the log, the drawings taped to the cellar wall, the children rescued from the shack, all of it built a picture no one could deny. One by one, survivors took the stand. Their voices trembled at first, hands clutching tissues or the railing in front of them, but with each word they grew stronger. They told stories of fear and silence, of nights spent trapped, of the lies Harlan whispered to keep them quiet. Parents wept openly in the gallery, some holding photographs of children lost too soon, others clutching their children who had survived. Every tear, every broken voice filled the room with both grief and strength. Claire sat quietly near the front, Max lying at her feet, his body still healing but his presence steady as stone. His bandaged side rose and fell with calm breaths, his ears twitching whenever a voice wavered on the stand. People glanced at him often, some offering small smiles through their tears. They knew he was more than a dog. He was the reason truth had clawed its way back to them, the reason children had been saved, the reason they were sitting here facing justice instead of despair. The defense tried to argue, tried to paint Harlan as confused, as misunderstood, but no one in the room believed it. Not after seeing the evidence, not after hearing the survivors, and not with Max sitting in quiet defiance, a reminder that the predator had been caught because one dog refused to look away. When the jury returned, the silence in the room was so sharp it felt like glass ready to shatter. The foreman rose, cleared his throat, and spoke the words everyone had been waiting for. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Tears fell. Voices cried out in relief. Some cheered. Others simply collapsed into one another's arms. Harlan was led away, his head bowed, his life reduced to the cold walls of a prison cell. And in the gallery, Claire leaned down to rest her hand on Max's head. He didn't lift his eyes, but his tail thumped once against the floor. Quiet and certain, he had carried them here, and justice had finally followed. The sun rose warm over Oakridge on the morning the playground reopened, casting soft light across swings that no longer creaked in loneliness but gleamed with fresh paint. Workers had scrubbed away the shadows, repainted the slide in bright colors, and laid down new sand where the old had been dug apart. For weeks the place had been locked behind yellow tape, a reminder of what had been uncovered there. But today the tape was gone, and children were gathering once again, their voices rising in laughter that felt like the town had finally learned how to breathe. On the brick wall near the entrance, a mural stretched wide and proud. It showed Max standing tall, his coat brushed in shades of bronze and gold. Children gathered around him with faces lifted in gratitude. The old slide stood in the background, not hidden in gloom but painted in sunlight, reclaimed from its past. Beneath the mural, in bold letters, were the words that captured everything he had done. He barked when we were silent. He gave the lost their voice. Parents paused to read it, some with tears in their eyes, some holding their children closer, grateful that hope could grow again in the very place where it had once been stolen. Claire walked slowly across the playground, her uniform jacket draped over one arm, her other hand resting lightly on Max's back. He moved with calm dignity, his steps slower now, his sides still marked by scars, but his head was high and his eyes alert. Children broke from their parents to run up to him, their hands reaching, their voices calling his name. Max stood patiently, letting small fingers stroke his fur, his tail giving a quiet wag. He had become more than a dog to this town. He was a symbol that darkness could be driven out, that silence could be broken. The chief gave a short speech, his voice gruff with emotion, but it was not the words people remembered. It was the sight of Max lying at Claire's side, watching the crowd as if guarding them still. Reporters snapped photos, Neighbors whispered. But Claire's mind drifted away from the noise. She thought of Lily Grant, of the bear pulled from the dirt, of the children found in the shack. She thought of the night she had doubted him, and of the look in his eyes that had never faltered. Max had seen what no one else could. He had carried the weight of truth when humans had turned away. As the ceremony ended and families began to scatter back into games and chatter, Claire knelt beside her partner, brushing her hand gently along his ear. He leaned into her touch, his eyes soft. "You didn't just find them, Max," she whispered, her voice breaking with the force of everything left unsaid. "You saved us all." His tail tapped once against the ground, quiet and sure, as if he understood. And above them, the mural glowed in the sunlight, a promise carved in paint that Oakridge would never forget, the hero who had barked when silence nearly won. Thank you for watching this video of a dog's devotion. If you like this story, show your support with a like, and join us by subscribing for more inspiring stories like this one.